Hello, everybody, and welcome to the third edition in the series between the HR Tech Partnership and the Future of Work. My name's Sharon Sagu, and I'm your host today. We're absolutely thrilled that you're able to join us this lunchtime. For those of you who are new to this series, we're going to be discussing how AI and disruptive tech can facilitate various people management strategies. And today, the topic is learning and upskilling. So I'd be delighted to present our panel to you. And today we have three panelists. First of all, we have Brian Lim. Brian is the Executive Director and the Head of Group Talent and Development for the United Overseas Bank in Singapore. This is one of Singapore's largest banks with over 26,000 employees globally. So we're very pleased to have Brian on our panel. We also have Jig Ramji. Jig is the Group Head of Talent from London Stock Exchange, and prior to this, Jig held a role at Bloomberg. And of course, we have Devyanis Vaishampayam, who's the Managing Director of the HR Tech Partnership. Devyanis has held a significant amount of senior HR roles across a number of FTSE 100 companies. So welcome to Jig, Brian, and Devyanis. Just to mention in terms of housekeeping, please do ask questions through the chat and the Q&A below. I will field as many of these as I can later on. And please do bear with us with the tech. We hope things run as smoothly as possible. So I'd just like to start by handing over to Devyanis to really set the scene for us this morning.
Thanks, Sharon. So I think it's been apparent that even during the crisis, learning and upskilling has continued to be equally, if not more important, both for employers as well as employees. But of course, it's been challenging. And I think the challenge for employers was most of them still relied very heavily on traditional classroom training. But I guess they've quickly have had to now provide virtual solutions to employees working at home, and that's not been easy. And for employees, of course, there's been a whole wealth of online content, but it can feel quite overwhelming at times because there's so much and not enough guidance or direction around what is appropriate, what is quality, etc. But I guess a recent Gartner report has showed that more than 74% of organizations are planning to adopt remote working in some permanent way. And so I think this whole scenario of a distributed workforce is still going to be around for a very long time. And so I think HR heads, talent heads, L&D heads have actively started looking at a big shift in terms of how are they more agile, how can they provide more virtual solutions, and how can they cater to the needs of a workforce that's going to look very different. And I think AI and digital is the way forward.
So Jig, what is it that you're currently seeing or using in the way of AI and digital around learning at the moment?
I think one of the things that we're seeing, and this happened obviously COVID-19, was just the demands that are being placed on technology being very different from a learning perspective. Traditional LMS, I think, is simply not enough. I think as we encounter advances in technology across all of our lives, the users of technologies just demand so much more. And therefore, rather than a traditional LMS solution, I think what users are after is an end-to-end technology solution that curates, that helps them to choose the right things to learn and helps them to choose the right things to learn at the right time.
Sure, thank you, Jig. Really interesting. And Brian, what are your thoughts on AI solutions that you're seeing in learning at the moment?
I think as Jig has shared, I think there has been a lot of interest, over the last several years, probably the last 3 to 4 years, where I think a lot of technology has allowed digital learning to advance. And at UOB, what we have done, over the last three over years is that we've embarked on introducing a lot more blended learning options and looking at ways to deploy a mix of online resources as well as a classroom and blending them. And I think that has allowed us to really scale our programs to our population. And one of the few technologies that we have found very useful is to deploy a software platform called Intrepid. What it does help do is allow us to weave together our SuccessFactors LMS and also our content provider, LinkedIn Learning, and really gamify the whole experience, virtualize the moderation throughout. And I think that has worked for us really well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Brian. So I think we can see there has been some level of digital solutions that have been considered. But if we turn to think about adoption now and what's going to happen in the next 12 to 18 months, Jig, I'd like to go back to you to really ask you that given how quickly the landscape has changed due to the current crisis, what is it that you could see yourself doing differently potentially in terms of AI around learning?
I think what it does is, if you take Brian's example of Intrepid, or whether it's a Degreed or whomever it may be, I think what we will end up doing, or what we will end up seeing, is organizations almost skipping 2 to 3 generations of the evolution of technology, because they simply have to. This whole event or crisis has just shown organizations that they need to advance in the digital space at a much quicker rate. And so hybrid approaches may well still exist, but you may not even have hybrid approaches anymore. You may need to move all of your onboarding strategy. Certainly we have had to at LSEG into a virtual environment. You may have to move first time manager development series totally virtually as well. So rather than hybrid or blended, I think you may see full suites of things being available online. And I think the technology piece will just need to skip 2 to 3 generations to be fit for purpose in our new world.
Yeah, really interesting. And I guess, Brian, in terms of a different perspective from the bank possibly, what is it that you see yourself doing differently in terms of AI and digital tech around learning?
Yeah, I think it's not different. I think, unfortunately, we're faced with the COVID situation across the world. I think it's kind of leveled the playing field and created the same demands. I think we've got different degrees of lockdowns across the world. And for us, it's the same. That's created the urgent need to, have our employees work from home. And, that's basically thrown everything, up in the air, where our traditional classroom training and so on is just, not possible. So it's kind of forced us to virtualize really quickly. And I think we are kind of lucky in the sense that we had already gone on a very blended approach where we may use a lot of the digital content. So I think for us was really thinking about how we can quickly virtualize the instructor-led part of programs. And that remains relevant. So I think the challenge is to keep all options open, because we're dealing with a very multi-generational workforce. And you've got the laggers among a certain generation, and going straight into digital is sometimes challenging. So you need a bit of the different approaches to help kind of look after every group. And I think this pandemic in its negative way has kind of positively increased the adoption and the willingness to go online. And I think that will drive things a lot faster.
Fantastic. And I guess we'll see how fast that adoption goes. But I'd like to bring Devyani into the conversation at this point. Devyani, I think it would be really interesting for people at home to just have some insight on the kind of solutions that you see coming up in this space.
Great. So I'm going to share a slide. So just give me a couple of seconds to get going on that.
Sure.
But I think the point that Brian and Jig were making about adoption and technology being used has been around for quite some time. I guess currently, again, as they've said, learning management systems have been used very extensively. And by the way, any I know we were talking about it, Brian, on a call last week, but any feedback on your experience of learning management systems? Good, bad?
I think okay, to be fair to all the platforms out there, in terms of LMSs, I think there are limitations and strengths to all systems. And I think that the workaround really is to accept the LMS that you have and to use the strengths,
right,
rather than hope that it's going to give you, the magic silver bullet that it does everything for you on one platform. I think we have acknowledged them a long time ago, and we are trying to integrate, as best as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but I guess also LinkedIn Learning, individual apps have become very popular. So I think a lot of that is going on. But I think the shift that you're going to see over the next 6 to 18 months, and particularly where AI is going to play a big role. The first is really curation. And what do you mean by curation? I think in any case, a lot of learning material in organizations was scattered across different almost different places, different people. It was on PowerPoints. It's existed on drives. You've had internal LMSs. You've had external providers like HBR, etc. And the challenge has always been, how do you create the right content? But particularly if the employee is working, it's not a classroom environment. If the employee is working remotely or at home, then what AI solutions can do is to really effectively put that in a manner that is quality, that is focused, and that drives the learning agenda. So I think that's one space where you are going to see far more adoption happening. The second one is really AI solutions to facilitate individual learning styles. Now, again, if you are in a classroom environment, probably there's much more of the trainer interaction that helps gauge this. But if you have more of remote learning that's happening, then how do you figure out, is an employee more likely to learn using a video or reading an article or using a motivational coach, or there could be lots of options. And so something like Learnably, for example, it helps figure out what really is the uptake, and then accordingly provides and suggests the right content for employees. So personalizing is going to be another area where AI could play a big role. And then the third big area is really going to be intelligence gleaning. Now, I think using Slack, using MS Teams has become the norm, and teams are using it all day long. And there's a lot of information content that's getting shared. Now, if there was any way in which talent heads could really use that to try and understand where are the learning gaps, what are the issues, where does limited budget needs to be focused on, then I think that's a smarter way. So using data analytics intelligence to drive your learning strategy through the collaboration tools that you're using is another, I think, going to be another big area of adoption. So I would say there's many more, but I think these are three key areas. And in terms of technologies, I think gamification is going to become even more popular. Now, that's because it's great to say employees should be sitting at home and learning, but it's not that easy. How do you keep engagement levels up? How do you really motivate them to complete what they need to complete? And I think gamification here can play a big role. And then the second technology I see uptake happening far more significantly is augmented reality. Now, this has always, again, existed, but in the past, it's been more expensive. It was considered quite fancy. But if you have a remote team, if you have remote learning happening, and if you don't have the costs of hotels, classrooms, flying people over, then I think augmented reality becomes a far more affordable proposition. So my view is, I think some of these areas is where AI adoption is going to see a significant increase.
Thank you, Devyani. So I guess what we're hearing from the three of you is that there are a number of options and solutions that HR teams and leaders can try with their teams. But I guess with the increased pressure on budgets and given the current climate, building business cases could be tricky. So I'd like to go to the panel. I'd like to ask Jig, first of all. It would be good if you could share your ideas on how you could potentially build a business case to create budget for these types of initiatives.
Thanks, Sharon. I think Devyani gave a bit of a clue there in itself. There is this thought process around risk that will continue to materialize for all of us across our organizations and our different geographies around when can we potentially get back to what we were used to or the traditional working environment. It's going to take quite a long time. Many large institutions have already said that they're not going to bring their workforce back till 2021. There's been organizations like Twitter who've said basically everyone can work from home forever, basically. So in that situation, budgets are one concern, but in reality, because of the risk, people will still need to develop, people will still need to grow, people will need to focus on well-being, they'll need to focus on social connection. So investing in augmented reality, as an example, gives you options, it gives you scale, and it gives you the opportunity to continue to learn in a very connected and a different way to maybe just traditional online learning. I think whilst budgets could be a challenge, I think this is the new norm, and therefore to deliver at scale, investment may be needed.
Fantastic. And Brian, what are your thoughts on building business cases and trying to get budget for these types of things?
I think it's probably across the board that budgets, regardless of whether there's a pandemic or not, I think it's always been challenging to secure, funding for activities that don't generate immediate revenue and profits. So learning is one of those spaces. And I think I offer a slightly different perspective to look at, the business case. I take, for example, right, the program I shared, Better You, which is a reskilling program we did, that we rolled out. So just a sense of the time scale, it took us about 5 months from concept to launch. And, we launched it in October last year, and, we are rolling out progressively over 2 years to cover the 26,000 people we have. So how did we do it? I think perhaps that offers a different angle. The truth is, it still ends up spending money, and I think taking a blended approach or a virtualized approach will save money. But what probably made it possible was the fact that we went small. So we started small. We started with several pilots, and we rapidly developed the prototype. We worked with our vendors really closely, and we went on successions of iterations. Week on week, we were progressively redesigning the elements and making it work better. And as technology were introduced, so for example, the Intrepid concept, was only introduced into the 3rd month of the whole concept development. So this, I think if you ask me, my big learning from that whole exercise was that we kind of didn't ask for permission to spend the big amount. We went with a small budget to start, and that allowed us to progressively show results, quick wins. And as people started, giving you positive word of mouth, leaders required a lot less convincing to do. And I think, with hindsight, I look at it and say that is probably a way for, a lot of this new technology that is relatively unknown to a lot of organizations today, that probably the best chance of success is to take them in small chunks, pilot them rapidly, show results. If it doesn't work, fail fast and change. So I think, that would be how I would look at, kind of securing support and money to put some of these very important programs in place.
That's really good, actually. It's a very good strategy you mentioned there, Brian. Start small and get good feedback to help, backing of those ideas. So actually, I'd like to hand over to Devyanis to really build on that point specifically that you just mentioned.
Thanks, Sharon. So I think I just wanted to talk about, I think we use the hub really to help organizations with the kind of approach that Brian was just speaking about, which is to say that you start small, you start with a pilot, and you also therefore minimize your risk. Now, I think the way you minimize risk is, especially with the new technology, and we are very used to doing this with a lot of clients, is to take a problem area. And the way the hub works is we have HR experts who have strong organizational experience. So this is not approaching it with a view to say, oh, let's look at fancy busy tech. It's really to understand what is realistic, how is adoption possible. But we also have a very strongly curated portfolio of solutions who are vetted for quality, who are vetted for their ability to work with and be flexible with an organization. And because we handhold the team during the pilot, there is also a lot of learning that gets facilitated along the way. So for me, the hub is really what is epitomizes what Brian said. Start small, do a pilot, learn quickly, decide whether to scale it up or decide whether it doesn't work for you. And we actually do this for all aspects of the employee life cycle. It's not just learning, it's everything right from workforce planning. But the ones I've highlighted on the slide, I think given the crisis, seem to be particularly relevant for clients, whether it's culture, leadership, coaching, wellness, learning, employee engagement. All those are really important areas. So I would say, hand-holding and using experience has helped clients minimize the risk.
Great. Thank you, Devyani. Really interesting. We've had a number of questions, actually, so I'm just going to go over to try and get some of these across to you. The first one's come in from Jay, and it's for you, Devyani. Jay's asking, what augmented reality digital solutions are working successfully at the moment? So wondering if you could share any insights on that.
So I think feedback and coaching, helping managers with learning how to give feedback appropriately, I think that's an area. I've seen a great solution around performance management specifically, or performance coaching, because that's the tricky one, particularly if it's difficult feedback you've got to give. So you can practice, you can see what's the impact, and you can kind of redo it, etc., using a fictional avatar. But equally, I think the more this becomes economic, I think there's a number of different areas in which augmented reality can be used, including, of course, technical training, hands-on, physical training on crafts, etc. So the scope is getting wider and wider.
Great. And another question that's come in, and I'll throw this to Jiga or Brian. Any tips to convince employees who may not feel comfortable using tech solutions for learning? How can you, as HR, try and encourage them to do this more?
Maybe I'll give it a go.
Okay.
I think I connecting back to the program that we talked a fair bit about, Better You. So it's essentially a reskilling program. So what we were trying to do is to upskill and reskill some of our employees whose skills are, either becoming obsolete or will become obsolete. And so we face exactly the situation that that's described, that's asked, that quite many of these people are probably laggers in the technology cycle, and that it is something pretty foreign, pretty alien to them. So what we did was why we took a blended approach was exactly that. We started with a classroom situation where there is an instructor that made use of various sensory training elements to kind of encourage these individuals to embark on the journey. And on top of that, we even added a half-day segment where we gave these individuals a live, guided demo on how they can get onto the platforms. So it was literally hand-holding all the way at the beginning.
Okay.
And then we progressively, led them into the program platform. And in the program itself, we actually have got real people sitting in the back, moderating, the modules. So our program ran over 12 weeks, and every 2 weeks we release, 2 modules, and there's a whole gamification around to encourage people to complete certain tasks. The moderator gives out, badges and awards to people who do well, and so, what I guess I'm saying is that you've got to create a solution that will work. In fact, not just for the people who may find technology a little daunting, but at the same time, you're probably also dealing with a young generation, which is, way ahead.
Sure.
And you need to balance that and make sure that they also find this really interesting. And that so we're trying to balance between, helping the people who need help, and you need a system that actually allows you to do that. So the human element is probably something that we rely on today. I think, as Devyanis has said, I think AI has made a lot of progress. I mean, I must confess that today we don't use enough of AI in this process. I think I can see that becoming a reality in the next 2 to 3 years, where chatbots and AI AIs could be actively, coaxing employees, in different parts of their issues.
Thank you. No, that's really good. Really good advice there, Brian. Just a quick final question to you, Devyani. A few people are asking, can you give an example of how the hub has been used by a corporate so they can get a real life example of this?
So a recent example, about 6 months ago, was with a big international law firm, and to begin with, I think they were not quite sure which aspect of HR they really wanted to use it. And that's very often that happens because people are not aware what's available in the market, etc. So what we do is we sit with them, and I think we landed on 2 areas. One was talent acquisition and the other one was learning. And then eventually focused on learning because it was a board level initiative. And being a law firm, I think legal training also is a big part of their learning agenda. But interestingly, while we started with the discussion around legal training, actually then went on to wellness because that was a new initiative. And this is really pre-COVID, but wellness was already big. But they knew they had, again, as Brian mentioned, a whole range of employees. Geographically, the US and the UK were the 2 areas they were looking at. And catering to, therefore, wellness training was going to be quite challenging. And so I think what we did is we used this AI-based solution, How Now, and worked with them and decided on the first level curated content, which then went out to a pilot group. And then we also helped them with the comms and with the hand-holding, but also some of the working with IT, which probably they weren't as familiar with, I hadn't planned for. And I think at the end of the pilot, what they realized is the kind of insights that they had, they definitely couldn't have got. But they also were far more surer as to which aspects of the wellness training was well received. And therefore, it really helped them decide how to move forward. But I think the biggest learning they also had is it had completely underestimated the scale of holistic thinking that needed to go into doing something like this. And they were glad that they hadn't done it on a bigger scale and just started splitting the whole thing.
Thanks, Devyani. I'm just conscious of time now. So I guess I just want to throw out some really good ideas that the panel have said. So I'm just going to recap on a couple. Large-scale remote working will accelerate the use of digital and AI. So more and more HR teams will be thinking about this. The role of L&D will move to digital curation and personalization. So as we get more sophisticated, it will be less on the generic and more personalized. We should dictate our technology with the end user in mind. Definitely something for us to consider. And as Brian, Devyani and Jig have said, start small, get some early success, and this will allow for buy-in that allows you to scale up. So I'm going to have to close the webinar now because we've gone to the end of our time, but a big thank you to Jig, to Brian and Devyani for joining us today, and thank you to you all for listening. We look forward to having you with us next time for the next webinar in 2 weeks, which will be focused on AI and coaching and feedback. But for now, thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.